Going to be talking about the Copper Scroll Project. You see that here on our desk today, and the guest is Jim Barfield. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he was with the Lawton Fire Department for a long time, recently retired, and now lives just outside of Apache. But since he's retired, Jim's been involved in this project, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Good to have you back.
Well, thank you, sir. It's good to be here.
First of all, talk a little bit about this project and how you got interested in it. When did the interest in it start for you?
I met a gentleman by the name of Vendel Jones. He's been doing research on the Copper Scroll since 1967. Just happened to meet a lady that lived 2 miles from me. I was online going through a virtual yeshiva through Jerusalem. Come to find out, the lady that was teaching the class was about 2 miles away from me. So we took some time. My wife and I went over to visit with her. Had a great time. She found out I was interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so she mentioned Vendel Jones. And I'd been trying to get in touch with the guy for years. Well, she was best friends with him. His wife and her are best friends, and she made arrangements, and within 2 weeks I was at his home. Spent the weekend with him, and we discussed the Copper Scroll for all weekend.
You mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, so some people, are familiar with that a little bit. Trace us back to tell us about the origin of the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered, what, 1952, right?
No, actually, Dead Sea Scrolls found in 1947. Okay. A little Bedouin boy found them. He was a shepherd. Threw a rock in a cave out by the Dead Sea, broke one of the jars, went in to check, see what it was, and found some very valuable documents. The Copper Scroll was actually found in 1952.
And the Copper Scroll, how is that different than from the Dead Sea Scrolls?
The biggest difference is that it's made out of copper. The rest of the scrolls are were printed on leather or sheepskin, and some ibex skin scrolls were found as well. But this, the most unusual of all the Dead Sea Scrolls, is this one. This is not it's not a literary work. It is simply a list of items and description of where those items are located. And that's why I'm here tonight, is I figured out where these items are at.
And how are you, first of all, before we go any further, tell people what those items are.
A tremendous, huge amount of gold, silver, and gems. Gems will probably dwarf the amount of value of the gold and silver, but the gold and silver, you're probably talking $3 billion in gold and silver alone. And the gems, oh my gosh, no telling how much they're worth.
$3 billion?
$3 billion.
And you calculate that how?
They did it, what they list on the Copper Scroll is they say kekar, which is talents in Hebrew. So every time they list that, they tell how many talents are there. For example, there's one location that's got 900 talents of gold. Well, a talent, to the best guess at this point, is 75 pounds of gold. Well, you multiply that by 14.5, which is troy ounces, and then you multiply it by the current gold value, and it's somewhere around $1 billion in gold. And just one location.
And where did this gold come from?
I believe it came from the Tabernacle of Moses. During the time that Aaron and Moses called on all the people, all the Israelites, and said, bring us your gold and silver. God wants us to build a tabernacle, and he wants us to have plenty of gold and silver for it. Well, the people that were in exile took a lot of the gold and silver from the Egyptians. Well, that's what it was, that Moses and Aaron told them, hey guys, stop, you're bringing us too much gold. I think that's what this gold is, because it's just a huge amount. Amazing. And
so now let's go ahead, now that we know what it is that you're looking at, tell me how you went about getting your copies of it. How did you, that had to be a pretty tough, painstaking process to be able to get yourself access to this so that you could start studying it.
Gosh, yeah, it's called the internet. It really wasn't very difficult. Vendel had a copy of this. Actually, that's where I got this one from. But you could go online and actually get a copy, a facsimile of the Copper Scroll. Not as difficult as people would think. The thing about it is, the way they tried to interpret it. What the theologians, archaeologists, historians have tried to do is try to use some of the most bizarre theories I've ever seen, when in fact it's a very simple document. It's like if I were to give you directions to my home, tell you go 3 miles north of Porter Hill, turn right, and give you all these directions, but if I don't tell you Porter Hill, don't tell you where to start, you have no clue how to find my house. You got to know where the starting point is. And on the Copper Scroll, the first line, it says, It says, under the ruins in the Valley of Achor. I knew where the Valley of Achor was at. Then I had to determine which ruins they were talking about. Mm-hmm. In a short period of time, I had it figured out. Within 6 months, I was on my way to, well, actually, within a month after my first 5 or 6 discoveries, I was on my way to Israel. Went over there, sat down with some people. We actually went to the sites, checked all the measurements, and the measurements were exact. That was very encouraging. Mm-hmm. And then I came back to the United States, took the data that I got while I was in Israel during my checks, and 6 months later, well, it was June the 22nd of 2007, I had completed my report and was ready to go back to Israel for the second time. Mm-hmm. And things went fantastic after that.
Why do you think that you have been able to pinpoint it where others have not been able to?
Well, like I said, they've been working on it since 1952, right. Bendel since 1967. Right. The reason is I didn't have any preconceived notions. The first time I read the Copper Scroll was probably in 1994. Bored me to tears. Just found there was nothing about it that was interesting. The Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a lot of fascinating things in there. Mm-hmm. But this is just simply a list describing different locations and mm-hmm. different amounts of gold and silver. Mm-hmm. But what I did is I went at it from an investigative standpoint rather than an archaeological. They've tried to determine the time periods. They tried to determine who wrote it. That makes no difference. A verbal map has a starting point and an ending point, and mm-hmm. that's all I did. Is I used process of elimination, and each one of the words, rather than try to determine what it was saying from a literary standpoint, mm-hmm. I just picked the word up out of Hebrew, set it on top of a Strong's Concordance word, mm-hmm. matched them up, and then used those words to figure out how to what each sentence was saying. Mm-hmm. Worked beautifully.
Now, I'm sure you, whenever you presented this to some other people who had also been studying it, they're like, what's this guy from Oklahoma doing? What does he pretend to know? What were those conversations conversations like?
The first time I was showing my research to a gentleman, he was making arrangements for me to visit with a very high rabbi in Israel. I had to go through him first. He was pretty annoyed. He said, Mr. Barfield, he said, I got to tell you, I think you're wasting my time. I said, okay. I said, how much time we got? He said, you got 3 hours. I said, give me 30 minutes. He kind of grinned. He said, no, you got 3 hours. I said, if you're going to argue with me, give me 15 minutes. And he said, you're pretty confident. I said, yes, sir, I am. 5 minutes later, after I started showing him, he was locked in. And he told me at the end of the conversation, he said, Mr. Barfield, I don't care what the rabbi says. He said, you got to test this. You've got to see whether or not your information is correct. Mm-hmm. And I've followed through with it, and I've taken it to some very high people in Israel, and they love it.
We need to take a quick break. We're visiting with Jim Barfield talking about the Copper Scroll Project. If you'd like to find out more, they do have a website. Just Google Copper Scroll Project. There's a lot of great information on there, some video. You can see up close what the Copper Scroll looks like. We'll continue our discussion with Jim Barfield in just a minute.
If you have a topic or issue you would like us to focus on, please write to the address on your screen or fax us at 357.
Welcome back to the program. Visiting today with Jim Barfield. Lives near Apache now for a long time. He was with the Lawton Fire Department, but for the last couple of years, his life has been devoted to what is called the Copper Scroll Project. We have a replica of the Copper Scroll here in front of us, but Mr. Barfield has studied the Hebrew that is written on this scroll and is convinced that it leads to a gigantic treasure trove in Israel, and we're talking a little bit about that with him today. We talked, as we went to break, about some of the conversations you'd have with people trying to convince them of what was going on. Now, whenever you're dealing with the Israeli government, there's a lot of people that you have to talk about. He had a meeting with the head of the Antiquities Department. You can't get any higher than that whenever you're talking about this kind of thing, right? Talk about that meeting and how that went.
Well, I think we ought to start with here in Oklahoma. I needed to visit with the people of the Antiquities Authority. They were crucial in being able to get permission in order to dig in Israel. They have got law on top of law mm-hmm. that prevents you from digging over there, and they have good reason.
That, yeah.
Amazing amount of treasure just in antiquities there. Mm-hmm. I spoke with a lady. I was teaching at the Comanche Nation College. There was a little Comanche lady, sweetheart of a lady. Her name is Juanita Pataponi. She just happened to be a sponsor for an Israeli back in the early 70s, I believe, or late 70s. And his name was Shuka Dorfman. She sponsored him. They came here from Israel to do some training out at Fort Sill. Shuka is now the head of the Antiquities Authority, and she called Shuka, said, Shuka, she got on the phone and said, Shuka, I've got a gentleman you need to visit with. He's made a discovery, and you need to talk to him. Long story short, December of '07, I was sitting at the Citadel Hotel near the old city of Jerusalem, and at first he thought I was a nut. He looked at me when I told him what I discovered, but he's very polite, very kind, and he said, well, let's see what you got. I opened up my research book, showed him the first 5 locations, and usually that's all it takes. And after the 5th location, he looked at me and said, Mr. Barfield, let's stop here. He got on the phone, he called his top 2 archaeologists for the area that I'm looking at, and he had a meeting set up, and next time I saw him was at a meeting in his office at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. It's going to be, you told me before we started that this is not going to be a typical archaeological dig. I can't imagine that it's going to be typical. One of the 2 archaeologists that was at the meeting with Shuka Dorfman at his office wants to be the archaeologist on it, and I was very welcome and encouraging for him to join us, because he's the guy that signs the permits for whether or not you get to dig. So guess what? We have got a blanket permit for all the digging we want to do, with a stack of paperwork this high for a normal dig, but for this one, 0 paperwork. He's made it possible for us to do all the digs in Israel without any hindrance. And Shuka was very helpful, but he's now stepped aside and allowed us to work with the Israeli, with the gentlemen, the archaeologists that are going to be with us. And so, I mean, what kind of a crew are you going to have for this? I mean, you're like you've told before. I mean, you're not an archaeologist. You know, I mean, you're going to have to trust a lot of people to kind of pull this whole thing together. It's quite an undertaking. It's at first it's going to be very simple, because the first place that we're going to go look at and go dig is called on the Copper Scroll. It's called the Buried Cave. Well, if you look in 2 Maccabees 2nd chapter, I think starting at about verse 4, it talks about the very same thing, that Jeremiah had the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle of Moses, the table of showbread, all the implements of the tabernacle. And he put them inside of a cave, and he buried the entrance. Well, that's the very last line on this Copper Scroll. It says the same thing. It took them to a hollow cave. They put the implements inside, and they buried the entrance. Exact same definition, exact same area. Everything is the same. But the dig is not going to be typical. Not in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion, because you're talking about billions of dollars worth of gold. If it were pots, if it were broken shards, it'd be one thing. But I can't imagine the Israelis, you know, just sitting there brushing off a few tons of gold and saying, well, you know, we'll be back tomorrow to finish this up. It's not going to happen. Got to have some security. I'm hoping they'll provide the IDF and to provide the security for this thing. And there are several sites. I mean, we're talking about this one here, but there's what, 60? 60 sites. 60 sites, and all of them contain large amounts of silver, gems, or gold. And what kind of proximity are they to each other? Quite a distance apart. As a matter of fact, the last 5 on the Copper Scroll line up in a perfectly straight line, and kind of an Indiana Jones kind of deal, because the way they describe it, I found each point, and once I marked each one of them on the map, I realized whoever did this lined it up in a perfectly straight line, and I think they did that for the intention of helping us in the future figure out where these are at, because this Copper Scroll was written by 4 men. 2 of them you probably know. It's Zechariah the prophet, and the other one is Haggai the prophet. And you can find that in an ancient scroll or book called Emek HaMelech, which means Valley of the King in Hebrew. Written in the 1600s by Rabbi Naphtali Hertz. And I've got the document, and it describes this copper plate that they hid all this gold and silver, and then they wrote it on a copper plate. Same thing that you're sitting here before you, that they found in Israel in 1952. Now, others you said had tried to do digs in some of these areas before, but then came up empty? Matter of fact, one of the archaeologists was saying that he had dug in that area, one of the areas where we're going to be at, and I asked him, I said, well, yes, you did, but did you go down to virgin soil? And he said, yes, I went to virgin soil. I said, but did you go below that? Because the descriptions on the Copper Scroll say 4 cubits, which is approximately 4 to 5 feet. And then he looked at me and got the big eyes and said, you know what? No, I didn't. I said, well, that's what you have to do in order to find this, is you got to go below virgin soil into soil that you would think had never been disturbed.
When's the last time you were in Israel?
September was the last time I was there. I spoke with the archaeologist. Instead of me going to him, guess what? He came to me. He came to my hotel where we were at, and we made arrangements. We actually went out to a couple of the sites, and he asked me, he said, Mr. Barfield, where do you want to start? I said, I'm going to start at the cave. And we went out there. It was hot. Oh my gosh, it was hot. We went out there, and I showed him exactly where the cave was at, and he was nodding his head, and his eyes got big. He said, okay, I see it. So he said, that's where we want to start. There's another scroll inside of that cave that actually complements this one. They work together, and it says on here, together they are one, meaning if you combine the two, you're actually going to find more information, more gold, more silver. And I'm thinking inside that cave could be an incredible amount of artifacts. And honestly, the gold and silver is interesting, and the gems, it's interesting, but that's not at all what the Copper Scroll Project is about. We want to return these artifacts to the Israelis, to the government of Israel, and most importantly, to the people of Israel. Those things belong to them.
We need to take a quick break. We're talking with Jim Barfield about the Copper Scroll Project. Again, if you'd like to go online and learn a little bit more about it, just Google Copper Scroll Project. Got a terrific website with plenty of information. We'll continue our discussion in just a minute. Stick around.
If you have a topic...
Wrapping up our discussion with Jim Barfield, talking about the Copper Scroll Project. You see a replica of it in front of you, and Mr. Barfield's been studying it for a few years now and is convinced that it is a map that leads to some of the treasures of ancient Israel that could be worth into the billions of dollars, and he's preparing now to head back over there now that most of the clearance has been received from the proper authorities to proceed on something like that. So let's just talk a little bit about the team that you're going to compile and take over there to Israel to help you with this.
Most of the team, the main ones that I've got going with me, we're going to be planning. I've got a gentleman who's director of operations with Chris Knight. Another gentleman will be handling all the workers, Don Thomas out of Wichita Falls. Those gentlemen, their jobs are going to be to organize everything. I'm going to be working with the archaeologist primarily, showing him with my research. Once we do make a discovery, then we've got 60 other locations to plan for. Don and Chris are going to be taking care of how many other additional people I need to bring back over from the United States, and that's where I'm hoping the Israelis will look at this and say, you know what? Gosh, one ingot is worth $1 million. We got 900 of them. Why can't we use a little bit of that money to get the rest of his team over here? We're not a wealthy bunch. We've had some incredible support. Gosh, people from all over the country and now all over the world are starting to send money to help fund this thing. And we're really nearing a point that we don't need any more money. We're happy about that, but we want to have enough in case there's a war in Israel. We want to be able to get everybody out of there pretty quick.
Right.
But we've got a good team. Video guys. My son is good at video work. They've got some really good cameras, and we're going to purchase a HD camera just so we can get some. This is a one-time thing. If you open up the cave and those artifacts are in there, you don't want to miss it.
Right.
We want to have 3 cameras going, at least 2 all the time.
What time? When are you going to leave? Have you figured that out yet?
I talked to the archaeologist the other day, and he's still telling me it's still the first half of December. I'm hoping more towards the middle because I made the discovery during Hanukkah, which is the time of the cleansing of the temple, and it's all about the gold and silver of the temple. Made my delivery to Shuka Dorfman and the Israelis on Hanukkah of 2007. And it'll be Hanukkah of 2008 whenever we get back over there, and I'm hoping it'll be the same time frame.
And what kind of a timeline do you think the project is going to take? I mean, part of it is determined by what you discover and some of the obstacles you might have to overcome, but ideally, what are you thinking there?
I'm hoping 2 months tops. Gosh, I want to get in there and get out, and I'm hoping they won't make any news releases until after we're in the airplane and we're on wheels up heading back to the U.S.
And that's what I wanted to talk about, because I mean, word is going to travel fast. Especially in that small of a of an area. What kind of contingencies do you have in that?
The Israelis are probably the best in the world with their secrecy. I'm hoping they will come through for me on this one too, because we do, once the dig actually start, no one's going to know where I'm going to be digging until after I actually start. And then my team will show up. I will take them with me, and they're not even going to know until the day we pull up there and start digging. But I'm trying to keep it as secret as possible for the safety of the team and for the safety of the artifacts. Want to make sure, you know, no robbers come in there and try to steal any of this stuff.
How you sleeping these days?
Great.
Really?
Here lately, yeah, when I first made the discovery, I didn't sleep at all. Oh my gosh, I was up every night. Every time I think of something, I have to go back into my little study room and you know, go back to work on it.
But I would just think as the days get closer that you just kind of get a little more anxious.
Actually, I'm getting some really good rest here lately. I don't know why. I'm thankful because I'm sleeping through the night and it's great. Yeah. Very thankful for that.
Well, it's quite a fascinating deal. I mean, I really hope that things work out. I mean, it's, you know, if it is, I mean, it's the archaeological find of the age, right?
Yeah, and Jimmy D, the fireman, you know that.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, do you wake up sometimes and go, how did that
Yes,
happen?
I do, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time, I wonder that.
Well, it's truly fascinating, and again, I hope you keep in touch with us, and I'll look forward to hearing from you here in the next couple of 3 months, and hopefully you can give us some good news, and then here in a couple of 3 months you'll come back and sit here and we'll talk in a little more detail about how that went. How would that go?
That would be wonderful.
All right.
Thanks,
Jim
Jack.
Barfield is our guest, and again, it's called the Copper Scroll Project, so if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, just Google it. Plenty of information there that you can find online. Thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next time.